Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first India Procurement Congress. And thanks, Rachel, for inviting me to set the theme. We set the theme of the conference on a very macro level, not going into nitty-gritties of it, as the three power-packed round tables, we're calling it this time, would deal with those strategic issues which are important. Building strategic value in disrupted world, I think this is a oft-repeated lament now, is getting older as well as newer. And that's the symbiosis that we see between disruptions today in the current world. In fact, what we see today is a gamut of changes. I just put up there, but I won't repeat them because right from volatility, uncertainty, primarily because of too many factors today. And all these factors are acting and reacting upon each other in a way to define the total context of doing business as well as procurement. And that's why we see a very significant trend, and it's increasingly clear that the resulting shift in how people live, work, and play are not temporary but structural, beginning a new economic era characterized by volatility, regionalized supply chain, AI dominance, and talent scarcity. And I think this is where we fall. Yesterday, if you look at McKinsey CEO, there was a news in Economic Times and also across that we have 65,000 employees. And when you decode this, he's saying we have 40,000 human beings and 25,000 agents, AI. The world, this could be interpreted very differently, but this particular statement indicates the way the world is moving towards and the volatility that's emerging in today's world. And that is very, very significant. And this is why there is a complete structural shift that's taking place in the domain of business, and it's not just business, the world, business, and specifically procurement as we see it. All these are very well known, but when we started this, I've just used the old slide of mine in where I used this in 2023 in India Supply Chain Thought Leadership to explain disruptions. In fact, nothing seems to be changing, but everything seems to be giving a new direction and is multiplying. If you look at India's unique challenges in the neighborhood, it's multiplying. If you see the context in which we operate our business, this is what is happening. Generational drought in Panama Canal and issues similar to climate change are increasing day by day. You embracing ESG, and that's becoming a biggest challenge for trading with European Union, and it's really becoming very real. Israel-Hamas war takes a shape of regional and global conflict, and I think today you see how US has surrounded Iran through all sea and put all their capabilities there, meaning that something which happens between Israel and Hamas is now emerging out to be a global conflict, and that could have a ramification for the whole of the world, and for India particularly, and for Indian procurement in a big way. Trump administration shift global policy. I think one man that makes shifts, one man who thinks that there's only one word that exists in the world, and there's only one word view that exists in the world, is redefining, and the whole world accepts it. The hegemony of US, which we thought is shifting towards the rest of the world, is significantly higher than what we have assumed and what we have thought. And I think that's something that's China annexes Taiwan. China also China will never annex Taiwan. It will keep it as a strategic conflict process to see that the whole region is affected, and the data that flows from the Asia to the Europe to US through this state can be really controlled by China. It's just not about controlling Taiwan, it's controlling the whole route, and that connects the whole data for the modern technology, AI and internet. And I think that could be a strategic disruption the world can see. If you look at AI undermines trust in political institutions, I think it will not be EVM next election. It will be AI being used by BJP to oust everybody in the political arena or anywhere in the world. And the way AI is defining the political narrative, it could be a biggest challenge to the world. Maybe we will go back to the demand of Congress and go for a ballot paper. Maybe. Maybe the general opinion could be very different, and that kind of uncertainty and nation conflicts within nation state and civil conflict can increase in a big way. Climate change, high interest rate leads to global recession. I think we have been seeing this. It's an era of high inflation. Everybody is increasing inflation, and everybody is increasing interest rate to beat inflation, and I think that's impacting everything that we do. War into Ukraine turns into global conflict. I think it's not a simple conflict, it's a tariff conflict. Tariff and the way it is defining the whole thing. And Ukraine being a very critical part of this particular conflict, and Russia being a great supplier to the world, it's affecting the whole supplies and whole procurement process. Nothing has changed in the last few years. Actually, everything has multiplied, and this is significantly driving the world towards an uncertainty where the context of procurement changes. And this is why what you see is that all that we are talking about changing in procurement is happening in a big way. And we are at a critical juncture amid policy shift that's taking place in the whole world. Policy shift suddenly is by one nation. It's so focused on the hegemony of a nation state that the world is rattled and world is defining its policy around that particular one whims and fancies of a particular leader of so-called most democratic nation in the world. Defying all global institutions were defining rules and bringing discipline, governance and ethics into the whole global trade. And if the global trade is being affected by this particular, making America great in a big way, is going to be a great challenge for anyone in procurement to see this from a very macro perspective, because what we are not seeing is the macros that matters today in a world which is changing very fast. That's the old data. And every time IMF comes with the data, every third month, every quarter, predictions are very different. You look at the world is going to degrow by 2026 from 3.2 to 3.1. US remains somewhere between 2.0, and someone is saying, there are a lot of other analysis which says not 2.1 but 1.7. If you look at Middle East and Central Asia is growing along with Sub-Saharan Africa, and the whole emerging market that was the hope of driving the world is also declining, where China has a significant decline. China has a significant decline, and China is declining in a very significant way. If you look at the world at large in terms of growth, you find that the biggest challenge in the world today is that the growth itself is sticky. And in a sticky world, when the growth is sticky, what are the finer points that we really need to look at in order to redesign our trade policies, redesign our procurement processes, and also our marketplaces, and understand the trade lanes which will define the world in future? This is interesting. I took it from Pranav Roy's conversation with a very prominent analyst by the name Ruchir Sharma. And Ruchir is a very prominent name in stock markets. He understands Indian politics in Bihar, as well as we understand the US stock markets. And I think that combination is an important way of looking at the world. If you see this data, the world is sticky and world is not growing, but here it is significant. Reversal in recent patterns of American dominance is also happening. Despite all this hegemony, you see the rest of the world outperformed US by 2x, where US is growing by 18%, the stock market returns is growing by 18%, Europe, emerging markets, world without US, China, Japan is growing. It's just the India, and I think here is a clear indication that Indian stock market has just grown at 3%. We're very happy about the stock market, but it compares with no one in the world. It's among the emerging markets, it's one market which is a matter of concern. So while we must be the fastest growing economy in the world, this is a critical element that our capital formation through the equity route is stagnant and is not growing. But what is happening is that the rest of the world, including Japan, which was not a very darling of the investors a few years back, is emerging out to be a great country to invest. So there is a balance that's being happening in the world where the investments is going. And because of the low bases and slow growth rate in recent past, the world is changing from US to other markets, and this is the beginning of the change that is happening, which would really throw a lot of time. Even if you look at trade data, I'm not putting it here, the rest of the world has grown and US has declined. I think I have that. So if you see in 2024, percentage of emerging market with faster per capita real GDP growth than the US were only 52. 2025, 76% of them are outperforming US, meaning that low base growth economies are now emerging despite the stickiness, which clearly indicate that the world is adjusting to the hegemony of US without really, this trend being so significant that we can look at it. If you look at China's stock returns is more than 2 times the US. China is a country which is defining the world growth. Whether we like it or not, it's one country which is the only challenge to the global hegemony and a balance to global hegemony. You may not like Chinese, but this is the reality that's happening. But China also has a lot of problems. Let me put it up here. Why is the market returns in China high? If you see the growth rate of China, China is degrowing. It's growing from 4.9 and by 2026 it will be 4.2. But Chinese stock market were not darling of everybody. Suddenly Chinese markets have become darlings. Why? What is significantly different in China? Why is China amidst a very complex economic situation? Why is China's stock suddenly become a reality, the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing stock markets in the world? They were not investable. The right term was, and they have become investable again. In 2025 and 26, they have become investable. And they seem to will be investable in the future. And I think this is a very significant trend that is happening in the world. And if you really look at why this shift is happening to the other markets, you find that international markets are much cheaper than the US. If you look at international markets, 30% cheaper than US. So the capital is reflowing to the other markets, and hence the activities and economic activities, both buying and selling, would move to these markets. Emerging markets, the Asia is 40% cheaper than US. India is just 3% cheaper than US. In terms of stock markets, I'm still at the stock market. Indian stock market is plateaued. And I think the largest amount of outflow from our stock markets is the indication of the global growth, is clearly indicating that a lot of capital left India in the last 1 year. Not only that, there are other things. Because we have been talking very strongly about how the world is looking at India for investments. India has got the minimum foreign capital investment in last 5 years. The capital investments are drying in India, and I think there are a lot of other reasons also. We are also seeing a lot of positivity, but I'm looking at the trend which could really rattle India. China, for instance, if you go back to the earlier slide and look at China, one thing that's happening in China is that China's stock market is growing at that particular rate primarily because of its huge investment into AI technologies. And there's a huge investment that's happening in AI technologies in China, and China is the most innovative economy in terms of AI, where US and other countries, India is nowhere. India uses, India talks, India is good in terms of softwares, but in terms of hardcore investment and companies that really dominate, China is investable because of this particular investment in AIs. China is facing a crisis in growth. Why? Because though China export to the rest of the world is also increasing, all right, China's growth to the rest of the world also is increasing, but China growth rate in total is decreasing. There's a AI, there's a huge exports, and I think China has done exceptionally well despite the tariff on China. China has grown. China has grown and has diversified its exports to the world and is doing better than last 4 years. Why? Because it has always been an export-oriented economy. It's always been a dictator-oriented economy where they can just do dumping of their goods anywhere in the world at much lower prices than domestic prices, and they can really dominate the world market. But they are in also problem, and as the world sees uncertainty in China, the biggest problem in China is purchasing power and internal growth. While the East is growing, the West is still poor, the North is still poor, the center is still poor in China. Like India, it's just you reverse the other way side. Domestic investments in China is declining. Chinese government is focusing on it, but the growth within China is declining. China would be a real bubble in the future if things don't work for them. And if you see this happening, overspending on AI will hurt big tech. And I think the kind of investment that's going in China in terms of big tech and AI could be bubble and could be over-investment if AI turns out to be a disaster. I think everybody says AI is going to define the world perfectly, but it is like 1999, dot-com bubble. The overspending is creating that particular this thing. Though the Magnificent Sevens are really splintering, the analysis says that there has been an extremely excessive investment in AIs, and there could be a kind of a redrawing of AI investments, and there could be balance in AI investment that could be dangerous for the whole world. And I think for this particular, and that could bring another slowdown as it happened in 1999. So that's one significant trend that is happening in the whole thing. Trade fell in US and increased in outside US. So that trend is still continuing. What do you do? How do we move about? How do businesses really look at these trends? And I just said trends which are very recent, not very oft-repeated trends of just disruption. Those are known to all of us. I ignored them, but I looked at the trend that defines the intermingling of the global growth and finance, capital, and trade. And I think that's where the real problem lies. How do we plan for it? And one of the fundamental problems that we face, and we always see the procurement colleagues, and now we are into the board, is something that is very significant, but all strategic planning should include procurement in a significant way to project the scenarios. They need to understand the ambiguity, what is the range of futures, one or two they could plan for, and what is the alternate future they can plan for it. I think a lot of businesses do sensitivity analysis, what if analysis, and they think that that's scenario planning. I think there is one element which really is not there, is a clear strategic framework for scenario planning, which is business scenario planning, and everything is reduced from that strategic plan. And a strategic plan should be a cross-functional plan which should be implemented cross-functionally rather than each and every function having its own plan. And this is where the problem lies. And that requires a complete amount of data and understanding of the global economy and an analysis of the global economy. I think today world, data is not a problem. Today world, analysis of data is not a problem. Then why is it that we don't move towards scenario planning? And I think this is where I said that scenario planning would be a very important tool for everybody wanting to be in procurement. If you look at geopolitics and what I've said, it's very important that risk leaders will require more dynamic and forward-looking planning and forecasting frameworks flexible enough for rapidly changing environments. We still are in Excel-based. There's a dichotomy of great AI models. I heard someone saying great digital transformation. I'm sorry, I'm just using that frame. Great digital transformation, and we still on our Excels. I think that dilemma continues to say that we are over-investing in AI. And I think that could be dangerous. How do we really look at more dynamic and forward-looking planning and forecasting frameworks? I think procurement has its own forecast, driven by cost, driven by negotiations, driven by contracts which are half-defined. Half-defined, I mean only by the procurement organization and not by the organization. How do we really move towards a single source of truth that defines our buying? Now, that's a fundamental challenge that is there. Activities such as stress testing will also need to be more dynamic and consider a broader set of possible scenarios. Are we doing stress testing of our supply basis when such a rapid change in the global economy and global capital flows are happening, which are redefining the whole thing? Are we just buying it for the sake of buying? Do we have a complete visibility of our sourcing, our supply basis? How do you know what kind of risk exists where? What if tomorrow AI collapses in China and Chinese economy also collapses? I think such trends needs to be moving from a very long-term planning to a short-term planning. Everybody says in the long run we are all dead. I think the long run is emerging out to be a combination of short and mid-term which needs to be planned. And that planning requires a very strong focus on understanding what is long run and what is short run. And this becomes very important. And I think, though I said AI and other things, I feel that technological progress is creating opportunities and challenges. While we move towards using technologies in terms of employing it for better planning and better alignment of the organizations to meet the risk that emanates from so many other factors, this requires a near real-time data and analytics about opportunities and threats together. We always look at data as an analysis, data as a number, but not as an opportunity and threat and a trade-off between opportunity and threat. A trade-off between opportunity and threat is important in the world where technology could be the biggest disruptor. If you see it in the Israel and Hamas war, what was the instrument called as? Pager. A certain programming in the pager created havoc in Hamas. That kind of threat plus the cyber security threat is emerging out to be, as we progress towards AI dominance, we forget that it's an amazing opportunity and it's also an amazing threat. Are organizations aligned enough to manage this particular risk and understand this risk and put them into their procurement function? Second, there is the interconnectedness of all risks, geopolitics, technology. Is organization looking at risk from a very important perspective? Are organization aligning these risks in a way that they understand risk? Or risk is seen in, again, the silos and in the old framework, which does not really recognize the emerging risk and risk of the future and not provide a kind of a framework that would help us to understand this risk. While geopolitical situation remains grim, challenging, dynamic, and disturbing, one of the fundamental things that we really need to have is data about all our supplier bases. And this data essentially means that we should have the network of suppliers and complete data about it. If you are from certain industry where there are 30,000 suppliers in a web spread over world or even in China, and you do not know anything about Tier 1, Tier 2, after Tier 1 or Tier 2 suppliers, do you really recognize that particular threat? Even when it's not about resorting to the country or local sorting, not everything can be locally sort. There is a transition that will have to happen to go to the French sorting, China plus 1 or 2 or 3 sorting. But do we understand the geography of this? Can we map the geography? Do we know that what happens if supply in the nth tier of this thing happens? Do we do the stress test? And procurement has forgotten this. I think all transformation do not have this as an agenda still. And if this is not the agenda, how do you map the geography of procurement organization in order to understand the whole threat and risk that emerges from any kind of disruptions? As I outlined, any kind of disruptions, whether it's macroeconomic growth, whether it's stock market complications, or it is trade changes. The trade lanes changes in the world can define the depth and the width of trade in a way that you would be shocked, and you will see that the geography of your sourcing and geography of your demand has both changed. A tracking of these is important. How do you stress test? It's easy. A MIT study says that it's so simple. One is how much time do you take to recover. Another is how much time you take to survive. If your time to recover is more than the time to survive, what do? Then you move out from that geography. Otherwise, you don't have to move out of that geography. And when you move out of that geography, you need to create a base within your country. India is trying its hard with PLI, with some failures, some success, and some unknown failures and unknown success. I think we are at the very nascent stage, and if you look at all the data in the world, in the country, we find that some sectors we have done well and others we are struggling, and there is a lot of ambiguity in the way we are planning a transition. Why would foreign direct investment not come into a country which essentially is trying to be the darling of all investments in the world, and we are saying that, oh, this is a country which is next to China. Yes, possibility, yes, potential, yes, but there are so many other constraints and all policy constraints that are there. How do you do this stress test? How do you map the geography? How do you get the data for each node in your procurement organization is a fundamental challenge that you have. And these are a few questions that we really need to look at in terms of this thing. Another area which is very critical to understanding the internal of organization. We have been talking about external. I said there need to be a better forecasting framework. You find that some of the symptoms of potential hidden value destroyers in procurement planning are this: late deliveries, quality issues, cost surprises, unplanned overtime, many schedule changes inside the optimal manufacturing sequence, late customer order fulfillment, missed sales, expediting supplier deliveries, and many violation of agreed supplier lead times. I just took it out from my procurement ranking. And I think we found all these are collations from those. Thank you for submitting, so that it enhances our knowledge, and it also enhances our need to really look at them in a bigger way. And when you look at this kind of simple analysis, which is not research but is just a common knowledge which can help us to put this, something which I have to say is this: doing some work for some companies and a training program that ISCM does, we got this particular reply: suppliers are woeful, so we just hold more inventory to buffer their inability to deliver on time in full in specification. When the same person was asked about how much the supply schedule was changed inside the stated and agreed lead times with suppliers, they said all the time, and they are not just good enough to keep up. As an old procurement colleague of mine once said, we are our worst enemies when it comes to generating great supplier base. Look at this. We don't plan, and we blame all our suppliers. They are supposed to be gods in the world of supplies, where they can just create supplies for you and give it to you when you want. What is the biggest fallacy? The fallacy is that we operate in a disconnected organizations where procurement is different, manufacturing is different, production planning is different, distribution is different, everything is different. They all operate within their own sphere of influence. And this is what happens, because one of the fundamental things is that we don't even take into account what is the cumulative lead time that should go, or time frames that should go, planning time frames that should go into seeing that I can buy within this fence. Anything, if not bought within the fence, and within the fence you keep changing, you are creating cost, you are creating stock outs, you are creating surplus somewhere, you are creating something called bullwhip, which essentially we talked about demand planning, but this is in procurement. In all your material supplies, this is what happens, that when you intervene in such a way. And hence, one of the fundamental things that we really need to understand is that aligning the organization in a broader framework is important, and master plan MPS, master planning and scheduling, should balance everything. The basic knowledge that we have, which will continue to exist in a big way, should be used in a critical fashion to define the whole dynamics of interrelationship and use of planning and execution in such a way that everyone knows what is the cumulative lead time, at what time the supplies are needed. If there are some disruptions, we can have 10 plus 20% critical stock which can be kept as a buffer, and we know that each node can be understood and can be visible through technology. And what can happen is that there could be a free flow, agile flow in the system by adopting older principles. These are 90-60 O'Reilly principles, which are very helpful. Nobody adheres to. And MPS and master data is not something which people have actually taken in a big way. MPS is the biggest disconnect in procurement planning. I'm talking about internally. And it is called master plan and schedule because all other plans therefore are dependent on it. The intermediate manufacturing plan, the finished goods production plan, the material plan, and thereby the supply schedule. Everything is connected. I think that means the planning is the fundamental basis of what you do. How planning is changing is a new topic. I do have this, but I thought in the I would just provoke whatever comes to my mind when I am in this state to create a thinking process on a very macro and strategic and leadership basis, as this procurement congress really looks at something which we need to do in order to make all operational efforts more important and valuable and strategic. And hence, it is very important to see that procurement really looks at everything from a perspective of redesigning of the upstream value chain by becoming end-to-end value entrepreneur and create downstream margin management. Margin as a cross-function joint component. There is end-to-end margin management approach that needs to go first, not just procurement margins. End-to-end value addition should go, and then the overall value should come in to opening new venues for value creation where volatility management could be a source of competitive edge by using prominent good tools, by understanding global dynamics and understanding those dynamics and using tools to not only map the geography but also to map the operation. One could really create anticipating price changes to outperform the market and directly create value from volatility. And three, I would say agility through digitization, buyer of the future, where multifaceted roles that excel in entrepreneurial problem solving rather than just negotiating cost. And I think if you do this, what happens essentially is that you move into something very important. You start looking at high value analytics because only 20% of available data is there, and we are talking about everything we want to transform with 20% available data. The data becomes a very important thing. And finally, if you know your suppliers, you know the geography of your supply, your scope 3 emissions would be taken care of. You don't know your suppliers. What is this scope 3 emission in procurement? You're doing scope 1, scope 2, the organizations, and they can get caught up into the whole process. Creating a well-networked end-to-end margin approaches of understanding your organization, your supporting supplier organization, your supporting distribution organization can only help you to increase end-to-end margin. And I think these are very important things. Michael Porter once defined competitive advantage as a company building capabilities to understand its business environment and business environment which is threat and opportunity. So marrying the capabilities with the business environment. This is where the final point that I would say, and I'm not emphasizing much, is that build talent for tomorrow. Build talent for tomorrow. What it means, even I don't know. Right? It's so confusing, but please start building a talent for tomorrow. I see a lot of reluctance to train people. A lot of reluctance to train people. And one of the oft-repeated lament is that, oh, we cannot spare people for training them. Right? So busy. Why are we busy? We are firefighting. We are nervous and firefighting to fulfill business function. This has to change. People need to have time. The work culture is changing. We are finding the new Gen Zs want to define the work culture of organization. I think how do we do this is very important. Thank you very much.